So where are we in the course of?
We were just chatting, Bob, but the fact of the matter is that with I'm in trial preparation right now and
Yeah.
have done nothing to prepare for this meeting. Rachel and I talked a little bit. I suggested to her it might be useful to have, because I think the purpose of this committee and what we're aiming for is pretty essential to the commission's work. That it might be helpful to have a co-chair, which she will bring to the committee.
Okay.
For today, I can make a couple of reports, one of which I will hold. The second one is that yesterday, retired administrative law judge Julian Mann, who is chair of the North Carolina Bar Association's Judicial Independence Committee, held a Zoom meeting, uh, the theme of which was various efforts that are being made to preserve democracy, preserve the rule of law, and keep our elections safe. And one of the presenters was Justice Robert Orr, who gave a fairly complete rundown of the work of this commission. But Bob, I'll bounce it to you. Um, if you want to sort of add your impressions from who was on the call and all of that.
Yeah, it was interesting. Hank Van Hoy's former president of the North Carolina Bar Association and a longtime practitioner in the Davie County area, volunteered. He had been on the local board of elections for 30 years. Offered to participate and help with us. Isaac Ridgway, who is a young lawyer in Raleigh, is working with the young Democrat lawyers to get them more engaged in election law work. So and had a good response from the people that were there, including the president of the Bar Association, Patty Ramseur from Greensboro, was there. So I think it was a good opportunity to sort of meld with the leadership of the Bar Association. Jennifer and I had tried early in this election commission process to get the association more directly involved, but I thought this was a positive deal. One thing we had our committee meeting yesterday for campaign finance, and one of the things that came out of it was we tried to pick in the case of that committee 3 specific areas that we wanted to kind of drill down into and get more information, put together a preliminary report, recommendations, etc. And that might have been a little easier in the campaign finance is a more structured area than the topics within this committee's purview. But for those of you who had a chance to listen to Judge Hunter and Eddie Spees talk about their experiences in election litigation, are there areas that you think this committee should really focus on in both the educational role that we hope the commission will play, but also in addressing areas that there may be issues or problems? So let me just why don't we just kind of open it up and see if anybody has any immediate thoughts on that, and if not, we'll start kicking some around.
Pursuant to that, Bob, I will mention the other thing I was going to report on, not an action item or anything like that. It's just for information. I am president of an outfit called the Appellate Judges Education Institute, which, though it talks about judges, it has programs for judges on courts of appeals and Supreme Court, it's national, and lawyers who practice in front of those courts. last week, the education committee of that organization met. We have an annual wingding in the fall with 3 days of continuing legal education programming. And we're deciding what programs to put on. And one of the ones I suggested, I titled "What Just Happened? What Happens Next?" Because the annual program is going to be about 10 days after the election, and I think it's fairly safe to assume it could be a real zoo. Those of you who remember 2000, how the poor people on the Florida Supreme Court were suddenly faced with just, the issue that would stop your clock. Unfortunately, this consensus was not to present that program. I think part of the reason was the thought was some of the comments were, listen, there are going to be judges at this program. They might have ethical issues about hearing lawyers because the presenters would be people like Bob Hunter and Eddie Spees. Sort of talking about potential challenges that would come before the courts that maybe they shouldn't hear that. Anyway, I wasn't convinced, but on the other hand, I didn't have the votes. But I've also been looking around, and there are going to be a bunch of CLEs from different sponsors, both state and I think nationally, about the upcoming election from before the election. That should be not raise any of the ethical issues that were sort of floated. So we might want to keep an eye on those CLE opportunities, which are for lawyers, as well as the sort of things this commission does. It reaches out to people who aren't lawyers.
Yeah, I might add, I know we've got one law student on our committee here, Mariah. Mariah, I would just say keep an ear out over at the law school or in the broader law student community about opportunities for us to participate, either put on programs or enlist support. Yeah, I mean, I think we've got some good opportunities to spread the message, but I'm curious if anybody has any particular aspects of the challenges and lawsuits or potential litigation that they think there's a problem or something that we need to focus on. Any thoughts?
Yes. Hi, this is Amy Steele. Hope you all are well. Let me come on camera.
Thanks, Amy.
Hi. So I come from the grassroots space, and one of the things that we're hearing about and hearing on the ground is that people are confused. So whether or not this is, applicable or a potential issue to talk about, it's just something that I want to highlight. So I don't know how to frame it, but I'll just say it. So people whose doors we knock, and we have to knock our organization will knock 240,000 in the infrastructure, at least about 3.8 million. So the people whose doors we knock are generally confused because of all of the changes that keep happening. So it's not just changes for this year and the voter ID, it's just consistent changes in election laws, election rules, and things like that over the last few years. So people are already, mildly engaged or completely disengaged.
Right.
And so when we show up and we bring a message of hope and inspiration, they're like, okay, well, I can get on board. And then let's say we did that 4 years ago. Then 3 years ago, something changed. And then 2 years ago, something changed. And so this year, when we go back, they're like, well, what happened with this? And why does this, why do I have to now have this? And what about this? And I moved. And, what about a felony? What about the 3 Ps, parole, probation, and prison? What about this? What about that? And so there's always something that changes and then it gets reversed. My thought is we need more consistency in election laws, period. And something that if it's not going to be, a law, a policy or procedure that's going to stay the same for 5 years, then let's aim to have that be the goal of consistency. We just have, I mean, we deal with the lines changing and people calling constantly during a cycle from early voting until the primary or early voting until the general. And they say things like, you know, this person I voted for the last time, they were in my district and now they're not in my district. So then we've got those line issues and district issues and, you know, gerrymandering and all of that we already have to deal with. But then on top of that, we have election laws that change every 10 seconds, it feels like. Then the second and last thing I'll say, so I'm good friends with Dreama Caldwell, and I know she was prepped for a lawsuit or a testimony. And when she was prepped for the testimony, she had to testify, I'm not sure before whom, about the election, some trial that happened recently. And so she spoke out and, you know, did all of that. It is very stressful as a grassroots leader to carry the weight of the entire community and then the whole state on our backs to prepare for testimony when, you know, for attorneys, maybe you all do this every day. We don't. We reach out to the community, we stay in the community. This is not our wheelhouse, although I did take the LSAT and wanted to go to Carolina Law, but this is not our wheelhouse. So just observing her and observing what she endured, getting ready to speak at a trial about election law, it took a toll on her. You know, it took a real big toll on her mental health, on her physical health, et cetera. So I would just highlight those two main issues or concern. Not sure if it's helpful, but that's what I wanted to contribute to today's conversation.
Amy, in trying to focus those very legitimate concerns, is that like, I mean, should we try and get someone both maybe from the Attorney General's office, attorney with the State Board of Elections, maybe somebody with election law responsibilities in the General Assembly, to talk to the committee about all of the changes? I mean, you know, do you see this or our potential role as educational, as trying to pull together information that would be available to all, you know, all parties, all constituencies out there, or should we be working with election leadership about how do we stabilize the election process as opposed to kind of perpetual change? I mean, you know, we got no control over the General Assembly, obviously,
Right.
but you know, at least making the points that you're making, that constant churning of rules, regulations, and laws, you know, is unhealthy to encouraging people to vote.
Right. I
Any
think
time,
both.
so
Yeah, I think both. I serve on the North Carolina Board of Nursing, and we are upending our policies and procedures around the education and practice law and things like that. So, as opposed to changing two policies at a time over the course of 10 years, we're just ripping the band aid off and we're doing the overhaul and changing it all at the same time. Then it went before the General Assembly, and now they're poking holes at it. So, we're dealing with that. But the point is that it's better to work with leadership from a top-down perspective to have a broader view of all the changes that need to take place, so that by the time it makes it to the constituent through grassroots groups and through other groups of people who are educating and helping people on the ground vote, it's not so confusing. And then I do think people who are closest to the problem need to be, and everyone's close to the problem. People who are closest to the beneficiary of the problem, meaning the voters themselves, need to be called in. Grassroots leaders, perhaps some attorneys in the AG's office, and also maybe a couple of voters who have nothing to do with grassroots things. Just a few people from, you know, Charlotte, from Raleigh, from Greensboro, from, you know, surround Wilmington, who have just expressed concern, Democrat, Republican, whomever, but who've expressed concern about just the changing laws. Because I think it's helpful to hear from people who don't work in this industry every day of voting, politics, electoral politics, et cetera, about how they feel when things change and what it makes them do or not do. And I think that's important to hear from both sides, because I think if everyone looks at this like what is best for North Carolina, it's not, what's best for Democrats and progressives or what's best for conservatives and Republicans. It truly is everybody's confused. Democrats, Republicans, independents, we're all confused. Can everybody just pause and stop making so many changes? So I think it would be helpful to have both aspects of what you just mentioned at play here.
Right. Bob, let's see what the other committee members think. I mean, I think we could put together next month's meeting to have speakers that sort of reflect the kind of top down understanding of election law structure. I think, as we've all found, elections are a lot more complicated generally, even if you're into it and you got a law degree. So other thoughts? Anybody?
I think to Dr. Steele's point, I think it would. I mean, I certainly agree that there is a lot of confusion, and I think there's a lot of. Well, I mean, part of it is just the nature of legislation. It changes, right? Part of it is lawsuits and rulings. Part of it is rulemaking, and so, you know, I understand the legislative part of it, right? And I understand, I'm not an election law expert, but I understand too the rulemaking process. It'd be, I think, good perhaps for this committee and for others. I'd like to see maybe more of an explainer about the State Board of Elections and their rulemaking process and the notice and how they generate their procedures. Again, I am versed in the rulemaking process. That doesn't mean that everybody is. I think that would be good probably for folks on this committee and then on the commission.
Yeah, I would want to note, I think it's next week. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but Paul Cox, who's the general counsel for the state board, is going to do an update for our commission. And I think I've talked with Jennifer and Rachel that it might be open to the public, or we'd have to sort of figure out how to do that. But it's an update on where all of the election challenges and litigation stand, which may not provide answers, but at least it's a resource for leaders to kind of understand what's going on. So I mentioned that.
Dr. Steele's point sort of fits with something I think this commission in your tour a couple of years ago, Bob, ties into, and that's to be blunt, Steele, the election's been stolen, and the sense that the whole process is invalid, is being undermined. Stop the steal. That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
Both parties have candidates who have done that, but the Republican presumptive nominee is the one who's made a living doing it. And I just see dangers there. And when you point out, as has been done, as Amy's done, that people don't know what's going on, I mean, that feeds into the notion we don't understand the process. It's easy to subvert it. That is not looking really post-election so much as one of the events I attended that you and Jennifer did, the one where David Hood and his Democratic compatriots on the election board there struck me as being, very informative and very, frankly, reassuring. So maybe they would, we could get them back on the screen.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. So one other, it was, so are we okay? I think committee wise, and at least maybe for the next meeting, trying to get address in part this concern that Amy has raised quite legitimately about, the confusion and perpetual changing of the status. And part of it is litigation over which, no one has real control. But I think that would be useful. One area, let me throw this out, and this is really one of those odd areas of election law challenges that I would like to see the committee spend a little time on, and that's and I think we mentioned it at some point. It's the provision in the state constitution that says for Article 3 offices, which is the entire governor, council of state group of offices, that if you can't determine who wins the election, the decision goes to the General Assembly. And that's happened once in, the history of the state. But as we get closer and closer elections and more inclined to litigating election results, then I wonder how long it will be before we have another case where they say, well, we can't figure out who actually won this election. It's an Article 3 office, and so therefore it goes to the legislature. And I don't think anybody's ever looked at it since the June Atkinson, Bill Fletcher race back 16 years ago, or however long ago it was. And maybe not at this next meeting, because I think we'll have plenty to talk about, but I would like to see bring in Mike Kroll, maybe, who's the lawyer who handled that litigation, and just talk about what came out of it and where would we be if in 2024 the governor's race or the attorney general's race was decided by 500 votes, and both sides are claiming all sorts of issues that would affect the outcome, and there's some determination. So I granted, it's it's one of those odd circumstances that might occur, but it could really be divisive and controversial if it happens. So, yeah, any thoughts on that? Can I get any amens?
What was that constitutional provision again?
It is. I don't have my. I want to say it's in the elections, Article 6. Let's see. Hang on. I've got one right here. I'm lucky.
I got one too, Bob. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah. I thought I knew a lot about the state constitution, and all of a sudden, Mike Kroll pulls this out of his hat. Yeah, it's Article 6, Section 5. All elections by the people shall be by ballot. A contested election for any office established by Article 3 of this Constitution shall be determined. Well, that's not what I'm looking for. Hang on. Where is that?
Is it Section 5?
Well, I thought it was, but it doesn't say. It just says a contested election. I thought the language said something to the effect that, where you couldn't, that could not be, the outcome could not be determined. Looking for that. it may have been, it may be Article 6, Section 5 is what they used, but um, the gist of it was we couldn't determine the outcome. And they were, it was like, I can't remember, it was provisional ballots was the issue. And personally, I thought it should have gone all the way to the Supreme Court, get some sort of decision on the provisional ballots, then you recount them, and that should give you a winner. But before it ever got to the Supreme Court, they moved it to the General Assembly. The General Assembly adopted rules for literally for a hearing on the issue, and then on a fairly straight line partisan vote, determined that June Atkinson was the winner. And I guess they're using the word a contested election, meaning that nobody can decide who won. So it's contested. I won. No, I won. So anyway, I mean, I think considering that Article 3 offices encompass, from a state government standpoint, the entire council of state, including the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general.
Well, I like your idea about of inviting Mike Crowell to speak to us. Is Mike still with the School of Government, or is he retired?
Yeah, I think he's retired now.
But he's a good speaker, and I'm sure his heart's in what we're doing.
Yeah.
We could find him. He would probably be a good catch.
So any thoughts on the committee of, am I running this down a rabbit hole, or does this pique your interest?
I do think that seems really relevant to challenges to elections, particularly as elections grow more and more contested.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, Mariah.
Like you say, what is contested?
Yeah, I mean, like, and what are the rules? What are the rules that the General Assembly has on the books? They obviously could be changed. So, I mean, I think this would be one. This would generate some interest, because I don't think anybody, except those who were involved in the Fletcher Atkinson case, even remember that this is out there. I mean, frankly, I thought there was a possibility in the McCrory Cooper race back, 8 years ago, which was, there was like a 10,000, 12,000 vote margin, and there was some litigation. There was at least some talk about, well, is this now a contested Article 3 race that should go to the General Assembly to determine who the next governor is, which I think without question would have been highly controversial.
I had a thought and I lost it. I would suggest that we invite Mike to our next meeting if we can find him.
Okay. All right. Let me take that responsibility.
I would hope that you could, just call him the School of Government. They could probably help us track him down.
I may have his phone number. I've dealt with Mike on a number of things.
Oh, I know what I was going to suggest. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your new lawsuit?
All right. Well, let me build the wall. What I do as a lawyer is separate and apart from what I'm doing for the Carter Center and for this particular effort. So I want to make sure that disclaimer is on the record. But as I think at least some of you know, I filed a lawsuit on behalf of 11 individual plaintiffs a week or so ago, and the idea of it arose back when the Harper 3 redistricting case was being argued at the rehearing before the state Supreme Court. And then Justice Michael Morgan asked Phil Strack, the lawyer for the legislature, he said, I understand that the North Carolina Constitution does not specifically say anything about fair elections, but are you saying that the citizens of North Carolina do not have a right to fair elections? And Phil, who is an excellent lawyer, danced all over the courtroom and really never gave an answer. And the opinion in Harper didn't really address it. So I started thinking at that time, well, do we have a constitutional right to fair elections? And if so, how does that play out? And we have enumerated rights, those specifically set out in Article 1, and we have free elections and we have frequent elections guaranteed. But we also have a provision in Article 1, Section 36 that says, and since I've got my handy little book here, and Bob has asked, I will read Article 1, Section 36, captioned Other Rights of the People. The enumeration of rights in this article should not be construed to impair or deny others retained by the people. And so what we have contended is that the citizens have an unenumerated right to fair elections, with fair elections being, the whole underpinning of democracy and elections of leaders of government, and that if we do have a right to fair elections, then the intentional packing of districts with voters favorable to your particular side is a violation of that right to fair elections, because you've in essence preordained the outcome of the election. And so it's filed. We're waiting for the appointment of a 3-judge panel by the Chief Justice, and we will proceed to litigate it. It's received a good bit of interest and attention from folks in that, it asks a pretty fundamental question. I mean, do we have a right to fair elections or don't we have a right to fair elections? And if we don't have a right to fair elections, that's perhaps something this commission or the leaders of this state need to start looking at a constitutional amendment. So that's sort of the gist of it. And we'll see where we go. It's a little bit of an uphill slog, but it keeps me out of trouble to do things like that. Or maybe this is just stirring up trouble.
Well, the lawyer in me, Bob, immediately goes to the question: how do you define fair?
Yeah. Well, that was the first question my wife asked me. And it's interesting. We use fair in the law in a wide range of areas. You have fair and unfair trade practices. You have fair housing. So I think there's a whole body of law out there about how you evaluate it. But in the context of elections, it's kind of like a ball game. It's it's a one-on-one competition. And if government, and remember, no election's fair. Always candidates who were richer and better looking than me, that was unfair. But the state constitution is a limitation upon the power of government. And what this is government, the legislature, which is historically put its thumb on the scale when drawing the districts or apportioning the voters. And now with the sophisticated data and technology, I've said, if you want to draw a district with 15% Methodist and 52% women and 24% unaffiliated, I mean, you can do it. The technology is there to create and move voters into any kind of aggregate block. And so if government does that intentionally in order to skew the election, isn't that unfair? And I remind people, you only have to win an election by one vote. So you don't have to make it real unfair. You know, it's not some quantitative measurement that you've got to come up with. I think anything that government does intentionally to give one side an advantage, then that's not fair.
I was just thinking of the weather, it's another fair day, but that's interesting. That's good, Bob. And getting back to one of Amy's points, the results of the suits in Georgia against Rudy Giuliani, I think, can be helpful for those who do the grassroots work and feel they're being threatened. But we're running up against our 10 o'clock deadline. Does anyone else have any thoughts or discussion points that we can take to our next meeting? Okay, well, Bob, are you okay? I mean, I'm the chair. It's my job, unless you're willing to do it, to reach out to Mike.
Yeah, I'll reach out to Mike, and let's also talk maybe with figure out who might be able to address in some way the concerns that Amy raised, which I think people are.
Yeah, who was the attorney you mentioned who's like chair of the election commission or something like that?
Paul Cox is the general counsel, and I think Rachel has sent the notice out. I want to say it's next week, maybe.
It's next Tuesday. It's on the 13th.
Rachel, there you are.
Thanks, Rachel.
Okay.
Do you think you're available to talk to us? I know I'm not going to be available on the 13th.
Well, we'll record it, so it'll be available for everybody on the commission to hear. But and Rachel, let's talk with within our team about other groups accessing Paul's information, because I don't know whether you were on when Amy was talking about everybody's confusion and over all the changes and going on. So to the extent we could, put that information out, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I know our plan is going to be to record it, like you mentioned. I imagine we'll probably put it on the YouTube page where it's accessible by anyone, so we can disseminate that link and disseminate the video. I know we're probably going to be sending it out to our entire network. I don't think it's going to be open to the public just because we are going to be taking questions. I think it's just open to the Election Commission, but that's certainly something
Breaking
that we
up
could
there
discuss.
at the end, Amy. Rachel.
What part did you lose me at?
All right. So we got that. All right. Well, I think we lost Rachel there for a second. Well,
are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now. Yeah.
Okay. What part did you lose me at?
Well, you were just saying you weren't sure it was going to be public, but we were going to record it.
Yeah, we are going to record it, and we're going to be providing that information to the network and everything. But it's only accessible to the Election Commission. But we can certainly discuss with Jennifer and everyone else if we want to open this up even broader. I just think we have kind of a finite amount of time, and we want to make sure that the Election Commission is able to ask as many questions as they can.
Okay. That's all I got. Let me apologize for being late and getting on and being distracted. But thank you all for your participation and continued support in this. And Bob, thanks for leading this.
You and I want to consult online and think of another possible speaker.
Yeah, we'll.
Okay.
You go get ready to
can think of someone, they might want to suggest that we bring on to address these issues. And it doesn't have to be a lawyer or somebody that Bob and I know. We'd be happy to get that information.
Yeah, we'd probably be happy to get young lawyers. Bob and I only know old lawyers.
Yeah, we boomers are about to shuffle off the stage entirely.
Yeah. All right.
Rachel, when will this committee meet next? Is the date already set?
Yeah, so we set it as a recurring meeting. Let me take a look. We will be meeting on March 8th.
Right after the primaries, I recall. Shortly after the primary.
Yeah, I do have it on my calendar. Okay. That's a Friday, everybody. Oh, today's Friday, come to think of it.
Yeah.
Well, as we say, anything else for the good of the order? Bob,
Thank you, everybody.
and I hope everything does get sorted out with your car. It's a hassle.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.